Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down the science and, really, the strategy behind writing a scientific title that actually grabs attention, gets seen, and most importantly, gets your research read. Okay, let's just jump right in.
We've all heard this saying a million times. It's a classic, a great little reminder to look past the surface, to not get caught up in a first impression. Honestly, it's pretty solid advice for life. Because let's be real, in the super competitive world of academic research, your title isn't just some decorative cover. No way. It's the gatekeeper. It is often the one and only filter that decides whether all your hard work gets discovered, or just completely lost in an ocean of other papers.
So, to really see what this looks like in practice, let's check out a real-world example. We're going to watch a PhD student's title literally evolve from pretty good to absolutely fantastic.
All right, so look at version 1. It's clear, sure, but it's also kind of generic. It doesn't tell me what's new here. Now, version 2 is a step up. It gives us more context. It uses that classic, here's the situation and here's the new thing structure. But you see, the really cool part is still buried at the end. Then you get to the final version. This is brilliant. It puts the breakthrough, using sugarcane bagasse, which is just that fibrous stuff left over from sugarcane, right at the very beginning. That's the hook, right there.
And there's a fascinating reason why that final version works so well. It all comes down to visibility. Search engines, even Google Scholar, they tend to cut off titles after about 55 to 60 characters. So think about it. If your big new discovery is hiding at the end of a long title, chances are nobody's even going to see it. Putting your most novel idea right up front is just absolutely crucial.
This whole thing isn't just some modern trend because of search engines. The entire philosophy of how you write a scientific title has radically changed over the past 100 years or so. Let's take a look at the evidence.
Okay, so on the left, you've got this super highly cited paper from 1952. The title? Fluid Flow Through Packed Columns. That's it. Short, to the point, totally fundamental. Then, on the right, a highly cited paper from 2019. It's a mouthful, it's long, it's super descriptive, and it is laser-focused on a very specific real-world application. I mean, the difference couldn't be more obvious.
So for most of the 20th century, titles were basically written for a small club of experts in a very specific field. They were short, they were all about the fundamental science, and they just assumed you already knew why any of it mattered. The application was just implied. But today's titles, they have a completely different job to do. They're like mini advertisements for the paper. They have to be longer because they need to grab the attention of scientists from all sorts of different fields. They basically shout their real-world impact and use these flashy power words like novel and high efficiency to stand out from the noise.
So the big question is, how do you actually do this? How do you write a title for today's world? All right, let's break down the modern playbook.
A really great place to start is this formula. It's simple, but man, is it effective. First, you state your material or process. Then you state its application. And finally, you spell out the key benefit. This structure basically forces you to be clear, and it's perfectly tuned for how people search for papers today.
And as you're writing, just keep this little checklist in mind. Be specific. Use those power words like novel or sustainable to let people know this is important. Shove your most important keywords right to the front. You're aiming for that sweet spot, somewhere between 10 and 15 words. And, so important, make it easy to understand. Avoid all that weird jargon and abbreviations that only a handful of people will get.
Okay, theory is one thing, but let's see how these principles actually work. We're going to do a few quick-fire before and afters to really see how these rules can completely transform a title.
Check this first one out. We go from a pretty generic title to a very specific solution. The first version just says, they made butanol from this sugar liquid. Okay, but the really cool part isn't just that they made it, it's how they did it. The final version tells you the exact method and the breakthrough, all in one.
And this one is such a great example of how sometimes less is actually more. The first version gets totally bogged down in a minor detail, the 3D printing. The final version is shorter, it's sharper, and it focuses on what really matters scientifically, combining cell immobilization with vacuum fermentation. Much better. All right, getting that title perfect is a huge, huge step. But believe it or not, there's one more critical piece of this puzzle that sits right there on the page, just below the title.
Yep, that's right, the author list. Now, if you're not in academia, it might just look like a random list of names. But to anyone inside the system, that order tells a whole story about who did what, who's in charge, and where everyone is in their career.
So here's the code, basically. The first author, that's the person who did most of the actual work, the experiments, the writing. For a PhD student or a postdoc, this spot is pure gold. The last author, on the other hand, is usually the head of the lab, the professor who came up with the idea and got the funding. And everyone in the middle? They're important collaborators. It shows you can work on a team, but to really build a career, you want a good mix of those first and last author papers.
So, the next time you sit down to write a paper, just remember your title is so much more than a label. It's the headline. It's the hook. It is literally the opening line to the entire story of your research. Your work is important. It deserves to be read, so make sure that first line really counts.